Hey YouTubers, welcome back to Desert Have a Garden. Today I want to add another recipe to our sourdough files. So I am going to share with you how I make sourdough garlic knots. So there are lots of videos out there on making regular garlic knots, but I didn't see any on sourdough. So I just thought I should share with you and hopefully you enjoyed them. So let's go ahead and get started. As with all of my recipes, I do use my bread machine to make the recipe. If you want to knead it by hand, you may, and you can also use a stand mixer if you'd like to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. I take the pan out of the machine and make sure you add in your little paddle before you get started. That'll avoid lots of frustration. So there's my paddle, and we'll start adding our dry ingredients first. So first I have 4 cups of regular unbleached flour, and I'm still operating out of a 50-pound sack of flour, so I won't bore you by scooping it today. So in goes the flour. All right. Next we will add some salt. I have just regular sea salt today, and we'll do 2 teaspoons. Then, with all of our savory recipes, we still like to add a little sweetener. So I'm going to use coconut sugar, and this will take 2 tablespoons, but if you want to use regular white granulated sugar, that works just fine as well. Next, we'll want to add our wet ingredients. So already in my measuring cup, I have 3/4 cup of water, and we're going to add 1/4 cup of milk so that you have 1 cup of liquid total. I'm using macadamia nut milk, but if you use cow milk, that's great. You can use that as well. Almond milk, whatever you like. Okay, so like I said, 1 cup total of liquid, so that's 3/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of milk. Pouring that right in. And for this recipe, we are going to use some oil. So you can use olive oil in the traditional way that garlic knots usually have olive oil. However, I'm going to use coconut oil. This one is not scented. I personally just don't like to cook olive oil. I prefer it to be fresh when I use it, and we will use that on the topping. So for right now, I'm going to use coconut oil, and this will be 2 tablespoons, but you can also use olive oil if you'd like. Okay, and then we only have 1 more wet ingredient, and that is our sourdough starter. So you can see I have a lot today, and you can probably hear it when I open it. You hear that little hiss? All right, so I will dump that out into a bowl. This recipe is going to make a whole bunch of knots. I'm hoping to get somewhere around 30 out of this batch. Okay, the starter is out of the jar and into the bowl. Here it is, nice and sticky. Just work some of the air bubbles out of it before we scoop it up to use it. There we go. So we are going to add 2 cups of starter. Just dig in there and scoop it up. Kind of use the spatula to cut it off. This doesn't have to be super exact. Scoop it into the pot, and 1 more cup, and in it goes. And that is all of our ingredients for right now. So we will put it into the bread machine and get it mixing up. Okay, all of our ingredients are in the mixing pan, and I have placed it inside the bread machine. Using our option 8 for dough, I will just begin the machine. It's as easy as that, so let's get it mixing. Now you don't want to make any adjustments until you've allowed it to mix thoroughly. The machine has been mixing for some time now, and you can see the dough has formed into a nice round ball, and it's getting quite smooth. So I will not be adjusting any of the ingredients, but if at this point yours is too dry, you could add a tablespoon or two at a time of liquid, so water for that. Or if it is too wet and sticky and not formed up together, you could add a tablespoon or two of flour at a time. And just watch it, allow it to fully incorporate before you add more. So now we're going to leave it be. The dough has completed the kneading mixing cycle, and now we will allow it to rise for about 5 hours. Because it's sourdough, we want to allow it to fully process, and so that takes 6 hours. So for this rising, we'll allow 5 hours, and then after we roll it into the knots, we will allow 1 more hour before baking. So I will check back with you in 5 hours. The dough has been rising for 5 hours now, and I am just going to press the start button again on the machine to allow it to start kneading and allow it to knead it to a nice smooth consistency again. As you can see, it has risen substantially, and it will sink right back down, and then we'll begin breaking it into our sections for knots. Okay, I've got my dough out here, and we're going to start breaking it into knots, but first I am going to grease a pan, and I'm going to use coconut oil to do that. You can grease it with butter or another type of oil if you'd like to. So I just don't want the rolls to stick to the pan when we're baking it. And we'll get this out of the way. And then also we want to add a little bit of oil to the dough so it won't stick so much. And actually this could have been a little more flour added so it wouldn't be quite so sticky. You'll see as I'm working with it that's a little bit sticky, but the oil will help it from being too sticky. So we've got our dough here, and in order to get it into some manageable pieces, I'm going to cut it. And then these pieces I will cut again. And then we're going to make these into long skinny pieces. So you'll see I can roll it either between my hands or you can roll it on your surface. It's probably best to have a towel under there so it doesn't slide around. So you make it into a nice rope, and you want it kind of thinner on the ends than on the middle. And we are going to tie it into a knot. And these don't have to be like super perfect how you tie them. And then tuck the ends back in, and there's your first knot. It goes into the pan. So I'm going to make a bunch of these into our little knots. A little better tutorial on how to make the knot. So again, you just roll out the ends, and there's a million ways you can make a knot. So just like you're tying a knot, one goes over the other, tuck one end in, and this other end over here, I just stick it under and it kind of peeks out like this little dot right here. So that's my knot, and I'll do it one more time with the last piece. So I had 428. I had, I think, exactly 30 knots out of this dough. And there it is, tucked under there. Okay, and so I used the entire pan that I showed you that I greased, and then I have another pan here that's partially full. So with these here, next we want to oil the tops of them. So I've got my little brush here, and you can be as generous as you'd like. And this will help them brown up nicely when they bake in the oven. These will set on the counter for an hour covered in plastic, and then during that hour, however much time your oven takes, you'll want to preheat it to 400 degrees so that you are ready to bake when the hour is up. To get these right in the oven, and then I'll show you what else we're doing to prepare the garlic. There we go. So now I'm just going to cover it with plastic. To help retain the moisture. While you're making the knots, while I was rolling them and everything, it's probably a good idea to cover the dough that you're not using with plastic wrap so that it doesn't dry out. Towards the end there, I had a few that were starting to get a little more dry, but it is very dry where we are. So these I'm going to allow to rise for an hour. I'm going to preheat my oven to 400 degrees, and then we will throw them in the oven to bake. While those are in the oven baking, the next thing you want to do is start chopping your garlic and making your sauce. So I've already peeled these cloves of garlic to spare you watching that, and I'll start chopping them. But I'm thinking somewhere around 10 cloves of garlic, depending on how much you like garlic. But these are really supposed to be garlicky, so by all means, do lots of garlic. Okay, with our garlic all chopped, next we will heat some oil on the stove top in a saucepan in order to saute this garlic. Like I said before, I don't like to heat my olive oil, so I'm going to do this with coconut oil on the stove top, and then we'll add olive oil afterwards. So I'm not going to add a ton of oil in the pan, I'm just going to add a little bit. Okay, we have been rising for an hour now, and the oven is preheated to 400 degrees, so we're going to slide these in here. And I actually have some garlic roasting in there already. Just feels like a garlic kind of day. So I'll set my timer to 15 minutes. We'll check them at 15 minutes. It may take as much as 20 minutes. And in the meantime, we will get the sauce going. I have the oil heated up here on the stove, and now I'm going to add the garlic. And we'll gently saute the garlic so it starts to release its flavors. You don't want it to burn, so you have to be careful to watch it and keep it stirred. And I'm also going to add parsley. If you have fresh parsley, that works best, but if not, you can use dried parsley. So I don't know, that looks like that might have been about a teaspoon. I'm not real good about measuring everything. So you can smell that it's becoming fragrant. The garlic's starting to get nice and fragrant, and I can smell the parsley. So this will take probably about 4 minutes, maybe even less, depending on how hot you have it, so that the garlic is nice and sauteed. The garlic is just starting to get a touch of golden on it, so I'm going to stop it there. It has a great fragrance, and you definitely don't want it to get crispy and burnt. So we'll move it over here and wait for the rolls to come out of the oven before adding olive oil and then pouring this over top of the rolls. Here the knots are all baked and out of the oven. It took 18 minutes in my oven, and honestly they didn't come out as golden as I was hoping, but they are nice and baked, and you want them to be kind of chewy on the inside and a little bit crisp on the outside, so they look just right. And now we are going to add olive oil to our garlic mixture, and so I'm just using some extra virgin olive oil. And for this, I think it's probably, I don't know, let's see, maybe a quarter to a half cup that we drizzle over and stir it up in there. And then I will use my brush and brush it onto the rolls. And this is what makes the garlic knots. Otherwise they're kind of just like baked rolls. This is where the garlic definitely comes in. So if you really love garlic, you put on more. If you don't like garlic as much, maybe a little bit less. If you don't like garlic, I don't know why you're watching this. But look at that. This looks delicious. So I have used all of my mixture here. And then, using a coarse salt, here I have a sea salt grinder. So using coarse salt, you'll put some salt on top. And there you go, look at that. There are your garlic knots New York style. So if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos in the future.